right, we are good to go. So here we go. We are particularly pleased to be able to kick off the San Diego Skeptics 2017 speaker series with this particular gentleman. Our speaker this evening is a science writer, historian of science, founder of the Skeptic Society, editor-in-chief of the Skeptic magazine, which he founded in 1992. He writes a monthly column for Scientific American magazine. He's the author of more than a dozen books, including The Moral Arc, The Believing Brain, Why Darwin Matters, Mind in the Market, How We Believe, The Science of Good and Evil, and a book I consider required reading for any skeptic, which is Why People Believe Weird Things. This is a really invaluable book for skeptics. His 2 TED Talks, which have been viewed more than 7 million times, were voted in the top 100 of the more than 2,000 TED Talks available online. I've known him as a colleague and a friend since 1992 when he first sent me a free copy of the first issue of Skeptic. We've since appeared many times together on stage at the same conferences, including repeated years at the James Randi Tam conferences. We shared the stage a year or so ago for a joint conversation at the Nexus Conference in New York City. He has long been one of the most significant thought leaders in the skeptic movement, helping to inform and define the nature of the skeptic mission. And tonight he's here to debut a brand new talk, and so it is truly my great pleasure to welcome to the San Diego Skeptics, Michael Shermer.
Hi, everybody. Wow. Thank you so much for coming out in the rain. I don't think God had anything to do with it, but it's only the worst storm of all time. I left Santa Barbara this morning at 9 in the morning to drive to Pasadena for our own Skeptic Society event, which we finished at 4, and then I drove down here from there. So let me just, oh, well, yeah, well, you're welcome. Yes, well, because Jamie's a good friend, and we take care of each other. So, well, as you know, Jamie, if you can grab one of those books and bring it up here. This is the latest, my last book. Oh yeah, well, also I brought a case of the latest issue of Skeptic magazine just to give out to everybody. You can take one of those on your way out. Which cover is that? Hold that up for a second. That's the, that's the cancer cure stuff, right? So there's 50 in a case, so if you're coupled, just take one, and then hopefully that'll cover, 50 should cover everybody. Anyway, and then I just grabbed a case of my last book at the office today on the way down here. So this is a new talk. So if you've seen, the previous talk 20 times online or whatever, it's not the same old boring stuff, of which even I am bored with. So, but the premise of the moral arc is that things are getting better, and that there's been a lot of moral progress. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice. To which most people who watch the news say, "Are you hallucinating? I mean, where have you been?" So I thought I should address that in my next book, which is called Heavens on Earth, The Quest for Immortality and Perfectibility. So the immortality part I won't be talking about. That's the quest for heaven, the afterlife, immortality. Not just religious attempts, which I presume most of us here are skeptical of, but scientific attempts. I call it afterlife or atheist. This is the Kurzweilian singularity, upload your mind into a computer, radical life extension, super caloric reduction to live longer, have yourself cryonically frozen. All those things that, well, I'm skeptical of. I don't think we're there. Although if I miss it by the decade that Kurzweil is predicting when it's going to happen, then I'm going to really be pissed. Because he's been pushing it out. It was 2030, then 2035, then 2040. Now he's talking about like 2045, 2050, which is going to put me at 95 years old. And it's like, oh, okay. So I'm hoping that the cancer researchers, the Alzheimer researchers, and you're supposed to wear the bracelet and get yourself cryonically frozen, but I'm so skeptical of that, because I've seen what happens to strawberries when they're frozen and defrosted. Now they have a counter to that. They say, yes, we have this new technique in which we cryopreserve the tissues, and you can cryopreserve sperm and eggs, for example. That's true, but sperm and eggs are not brains. They're much, much smaller. So to infuse an entire brain with enough of the cryopreservation to preserve every last synaptic connection, presuming that all your memories are even stored statically in synaptic connections, which is also, we're not sure about that. So anyway, so I'm skeptical of that. But the perfectibility part is the attempt to achieve heaven on earth socially, politically, economically. These are utopias, which have all failed for good reasons, because they're usually premised on false notions of human nature. But in there I have a section on the ideas of progress or decline in history, and this idea that things used to be great, but they're terrible now, unless you're in the other political party, in which case things used to be terrible and they're going to be great now because we're in power. So it's a common theme you hear all the time. So the title of my lecture is The Pull of Pessimism, Why People Think the World is Falling Apart When It's Getting Better. So if you had to choose a moment in time to be born, any time in human history, and you didn't know ahead of time what nationality you were, or what gender, or what your economic status might be, what period would you choose? Okay, well, we're done then. Well, crap. Well, Jamie, should we just go to the Q&A? Well, so you guys... Good crowd, good crowd. Well, so I'm just going to rattle off, what most of the Paleolithic Stone Age, when we lived in harmony with nature and all that. The Neolithic beginnings of farming, or maybe Egypt, Greece, or Rome, or medieval times with the courtly knights and all the glory of that, or maybe the Roaring 20s or the 50s, back when things were great. Faith and flag and family, which I always remind my conservative friends, and a progressive tax of 90% for the upper... Oh, wait, what? That was in the 50s? Yeah, that's right, yeah. You'd choose today, answered the man who posed the opening question in an April 2016 speech delivered in Hanover, Germany, President Barack Obama. So Obama, like us, follows the data, follows the trend lines instead of the headlines. This is not political hyperbole. He really has tracked what's been going on. And the cases he makes that, to say that we've made no progress in racial relations because of Ferguson or whatever, it would be to discount everything Dr. King did in the whole civil rights movement. I mean, you're saying that this had no effect, this did nothing? Of course it did. So people who fantasize about a romantic past imagine themselves living in Pharaoh's court, Caesar's palace, Plato's Athenaeum, a knight's manor, a king's castle, a queen's chateau, an emperor's citadel, a cardinal's cathedral. But the cold, hard reality is that 99.99% of everyone who ever lived in dirt poor poverty compared to today. Well, I mean, you're already on my page with this, so I don't need to rattle off all the wonderful things we have going for us today. Including, I should note, because this is, I think, also a controversial one, is, we have so much prosperity for so many people. I should point out that the GDP for the per capita GDP for the entire world just reached $10,000. It's $10,000 a person for everybody combined. Of course, you had Bill Gates up here that brings the average up. It's true. But that's double than it was in 2000, which was $5,400 a person, 17 times higher than it was in 1950, and 100 times higher than it was for the first 99,000 years of our existence, in which economists estimate that the average per capita GDP equivalent in 2015 dollars was about $100 per person per year. So that would be defined by the UN as poverty, extreme poverty, which is $1.25 or less per day. And so UC Berkeley economist Bradford DeLong has estimated that in the 19th century there was a 200% increase in per capita income over the 18th century. In the 20th century was a 1,600% increase per capita GDP over the 19th century, and he's estimating that this will double again in the 21st century. Okay, that's not so controversial, but of course the hot topic in economic theory now is income inequality. I mean, what about the poor? Even Jesus gave up on the poor and said, well, you get in early to the next life, thanks. And as Hitch pointed out with Mother Teresa, it's like she's just comforting the poor for them to make it to the next, offering them solace in the next world when they really just need some basic substance here, now. Okay, so, but that's about to end. In fact, The economist Max Roser has compiled data to show that between 1820, but in 1820, between 84 and 94% of the world's people lived in poverty or extreme poverty, $2.50 a day or $1.25 a day in 2015 dollars, according to the UN. By 1981, it dropped to 52%. By 2010, it was 20%, and in 2015, it was under 10%, and they're estimating it will be zero by 2035. The end of poverty. I mean, just imagine that this, for millennia, people have been talking about, what do we do with the poor? There will be no more poor, sort of. Okay, part of it is the difference between categorical thinking and continuous thinking. So making $1.26 a day means you're not in extreme poverty, but come on, that's not exactly a good life. So obviously we have to do much better than that. But that's the rate it's going. And there are people, since probably a lot of you are Star Trek fans, Trekonomics, Star Trek type post-scarcity economics, that there'll be enough prosperity for everyone to at least have a basic subsistence for living, 3 square meals a day, a roof over your head, healthcare, that sort of thing, that we will likely get by 2100. Anyway, okay, so this goes on. In the moral arc, I track the expansion of civil rights and civil liberties for more people in more places, the eradication of slavery. It's illegal in every country in the world. The eradication of torture. It's illegal in almost every country in the world. There's just this one holdout in the Western democracies that still practices, enhanced interrogation. It's okay. The trend lines, though, not the exceptions, but the trend lines are in the right direction. Okay, so why all the pessimism? I mean, this is all you ever hear. 2016 was the worst year in history. Of course, the people saying that happened to lose on the election in November. Had they won, then it'd be the other side saying it's the worst year in history. But why would anybody say that given all the progress we've made? Okay, so I compiled 6 proximate factors and 1 ultimate element, I think, operating to distort our perception of reality, that things are pretty good. So I make the distinction between proximate and ultimate. Proximate are just the immediate causal vectors that cause us to think certain things, and then the ultimate. Well, why would we think that way at all, ever, in the first place? Okay, sort of an immediate and evolutionary distinction. So the 6 proximate factors. 1, relative inequality. So economically speaking, even though the poor are getting rich, the rich are getting richer faster. So objective progress feels like regress to those who are not in the upper 1%, 10%, whatever. So even though the pie is increasing, so all the slices are bigger, the slices are not evenly divided, so those whose slices are getting bigger but not as fast as the bigger slices are getting. I said that very poorly, but you get the idea. Here's the analogy I made. So let's say I make $100,000 a year and Elon Musk makes $100 million a year, and we each get a doubling of our income. So now I make $200,000 a year, so I'm feeling pretty good until I see he makes $200 million a year. So my increase feels like a relative regress. It doesn't feel like it's very big. It feels like somebody's getting more, a lot more. So the research on this shows that people tend to overestimate the number of American households earning less than $35,000 a year, believing it to be almost half when the real number is about a third. On the other end, people underestimate the number of American households earning $75,000 a year or more, believing it to be less than a quarter when the real figure is a third. They also overestimated income inequality by double, figuring that the richest 20% make about 31 times more than the poorest 20% when the real number is 15. And the average annual income of the richest 20% of Americans, in fact, is $169,000 a year. That's what the average American in the top 20% makes, whereas survey participants peg the number at $2 million a year. So, I mean, $169,000 a year is a good living, but you're not rich. You're not buying politicians and bribing people, and you don't have power with $169,000 a year. We're really only talking about that upper, and it's not even the 1%. It's really the 1/10 of 1% that has that kind of power. The second one is zero-sum thinking. So and this is evolutionary economics, or this is what I call evonomics or folk economics. In the environment in which we evolved in these small bands and tribes of hunter-gatherers, there was no wealth. And the studies on these societies show that they're very egalitarian. They do a lot of sharing, and there's a reinforcement of sharing. That is, if you try to hoard, you're punished. And the reason for this is because there's not much stuff to have, and life is very difficult. So we have to smooth over the hard places and take care of each other just to get by. And so there's no invisible hand in the marketplace. There's no excessive disparity between rich and poor, because everyone is, compared to today, poor. So that's the zero-sum world in which our brains evolved. In the non-zero world of modern economics, where exchanges can be non-zero, where the profit of one can be the profit of another. I'm not talking about force and fraud, but I'm talking about just regular exchanges. That's counterintuitive. That's not what our brains are used to. So zero-sum thinking is the second factor. 3 is the media bias toward bad news and the clickbait punditry, which is the new thing. So, people pound the media, but this is their job, including me. It's like follow the trend lines, not the headlines. But the headlines is what the media does, and their job is to report on the bad news that happens every day. And no matter how good things that we'll ever get, there will always be enough bad things to fill the evening news. So there's always going to be that kind of stuff, and that's what is immediate, emotionally salient, that gets our attention. That's what we evolved to do, is to pay attention to immediately important things in our environment. So another day in Turkey without a coup goes unreported, but just try and take over the country without the world's media following it and every person out there with a cell phone. Just watching the protesters on Inauguration Day and then the marchers yesterday, and pretty much everyone you see is out there with their phone doing this. It's like, doesn't anybody just like engage in the process of being there through your eyes? It's really funny. But no one stands in a country with a camera crew in which there's no revolution, there's no coup, there's no violence, there's nothing. No one's standing at a grammar school saying, and yet another day without a school shooting here at this little elementary school. Of course, we only focus on the bad things that happen. And of course, the clickbait punditry has made it even worse, that you can make money on getting people to click on, so they put these catchy headlines. So compare these two headlines. Here are the top 10 ways life has improved this last century, versus here are the top 10 worst things that happened this century. Well, of course, you're more likely to click on the second one. Like, ooh, what are the 10 worst? I really want to know. And talk radio, I think, has really made this much worse. So I've just been thinking about, what just happened, because this is what everybody's talking about. And I don't want to talk about him tonight, okay, but if you want a sort of in-depth, thoughtful analysis of what just happened, PBS Frontline just aired a 4-hour documentary series called "The Divided States of America," and they throughout the whole 4 hours they play clips from Mark Levin, Rush Limbaugh, and the conservative, and they just pound, not just Obama, they are pounding the Republicans who are not going far enough. I mean, they are just hammering people, like McCain. He's the old guard, or Cantor, or who was the Boehner. I mean, like Boehner is like a traitor to our cause. They build this up. This is what's kind of driven the divisiveness within the Republican Party, to allow someone who's even further out than that to come in. I thought that was insightful. I listened to talk radio just to see, you have to do this if you want to know what the others, assuming you think that they're the other side. you really got to listen to these guys. Mark Levin is super smart, and he's a good writer, and he just pounds and pounds and pounds for 3 hours. Rush, not so much. But he has millions and millions of followers. What are if you're one of these people? I don't know how this guy won. I don't know anybody who voted for him. You're in the bubble. You got to say, what are these people thinking? You got to listen to talk radio. So the media bias, clickbait punditry, it really drives a lot of our distortions about reality, about the way things really are. This morning's New York Times has an op-ed piece on 2017 will be the best year ever. This was who wrote the piece this morning? Who's is it Brooks? Not Brooks, the other guy. Yeah, Christoph, yes. He's in Africa talking. They never heard of Trump or Obama. They just, where's my meal coming from for tomorrow? How am I going to feed my kids? It's good to have perspective on things. Okay, 4, loss aversion. On average, losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good. So let me just repeat that. Losses hurt twice as much as gains feel good. The tennis champion Jimmy Connors put it this way in a 1975 Sports Illustrated article, suggesting that he might throw a match to a friend. Come on, damn it. Whoever says I tank will get a punch in the chops. I hate losing more than I love winning. In the film Moneyball, Brad Pitt's character, Billy Beane, general manager of the Oakland A's, explains the psychology of loss aversion in baseball. You get on base, we win. You don't, we lose, and I hate losing. I hate it. I hate losing more even than I want to win. Cycling superstar Lance Armstrong echoed the sentiment in explaining to filmmaker Alex Gibney that he was more motivated to not let cancer, and subsequently other cyclists, defeat him than he was by the pull of positive payoffs of winning, which in his case were substantial. I like to win, but more than anything, I can't stand this idea of losing, because to me, losing means death. So behavioral economists have demonstrated experimentally that in order to get someone to take a gamble or to risk an investment, the potential payoff has to be about double what the possible loss might be. Gamblers are highly sensitive to losses and tend to follow them with bigger bets, and in turn conservative when winning by placing smaller bets, when you should do the opposite. Behavioral economist Richard Thaler asked subjects, who would they rather be in the following scenario, Mr. A or Mr. B? Okay. So Mr. A is waiting in line at a movie theater. When he gets to the ticket window, he's told that as the 100,000th customer of the theater, he's just won $100. Mr. B is waiting in line at a different theater. The man in front of him wins $1,000 for being the 1,000,000th customer of the theater. Mr. B wins $150. Believe it or not, most people said, well, I'd rather be Mr. A. Wait, you get $50 more if you're Mr. B. Yeah, but that bastard in front of me got $1,000 and I am not happy about that. So number 5 is related to that, the endowment effect, in which we're willing to invest more in defending what is already ours than we are to take what is someone else's. Think of a dog that is willing to spend much more energy defending his bone than he is to exert energy to take some other dog's bone. Thaler tested this. He gave subjects a coffee mug and said, it's worth $6. What would you sell it for? What's the lowest price you would sell it for? And the average was $5.25. Other subjects were not given a mug, but offered the opportunity, here's a mug, it's worth $6, what would you pay for it? And their price was $2.75. So pretty close to half. So just merely owning the mug makes the value go up. That's the endowment effect. And these effects have been replicated a number of times. And number 6, the negativity bias, or as it was put in a paper by psychologist Roy Baumeister, Ellen Bralowski, Katrin Finacker, and Kathleen Bowes. Bad is stronger than good. Bad is stronger than good. Across every domain of human psychology that they study, on average and in the long run, the psychological effects of negative outcomes trump those that are positive. Bad smells elicit more animated facial expressions than good or neutral smells. So, it smells nice, nice, or something that's really odorous, malodorous, elicits this sort of disgust face. Bad impressions and negative stereotypes form faster and are more resistant to change than positive ones. Memory recall is better for bad behaviors, events, and information than it is for good. You will remember something really bad in great detail more than you would something that's good that happened. Negative stimuli have a stronger influence on neural activity than positive stimuli. Losing money and friends has a greater impact on people than gaining money and friends. Criticism and negative feedback hurts more than praise, and positive feedback feels good. Just think of looking at your Twitter feed, like the little heart. Shermer's gone off the deep end. What? There was one bad one in there. Who is this? It's like you just focus on the negative. It just pops right out. A study of the emotional content of diaries found that bad events negatively impacted both good and bad moods, whereas good events were limited to affecting only good moods. So if you follow that, so something bad happens and then everything goes south, whereas positive one only lifts the positive one does not lift you out of a bad mood. Bad everyday events have a greater impact than good. For example, having a good day does not necessarily lead to a good mood the next day, whereas a bad day often does carry over its consequences into the next day. Those are related. Bad information is processed more thoroughly than is good information. Traumatic events leave traces in mood and memory longer than good events. For example, a single childhood traumatic event like sexual molestation can erase years of positive experiences. The well-known effect that physical proximity of strangers in a living environment, for example, college dorms, is a strong predictor of who will become friends. So proximity of just living close to each other is a predictor of who will become friends, but it predicted even more who would become enemies. An analysis of over 17,000 psychological research papers, 69% of them dealt with negative issues compared to only 31% that were positive. So Baumeister thinks probably this has to do with the fact that bad events have a bigger impact on people's lives, so the effect sizes are larger when you study them, and so you're more likely to get those published and funded for negative psychology, which is why positive psychology is kind of a small area, as negative psychology, study of how people are affected by bad things gets more funding. And finally, morally bad actions by far weigh more on the moral evaluation of a person by others than morally good actions. In an aptly titled article, "Two Rights Don't Make Up for a Wrong," the authors found that the overall goodness of a person is determined mostly by his worst bad deed. And given a person who has done evil, an infinite number of good deeds may not produce a favorable overall impression. So you're not going to resurrect Hitler with any list of good things that he's a vegetarian. Okay. In a second paper that was published almost the same month as that bad is stronger than good, psychologists Paul Rosen and Edward Roisman published a paper on what they call negativity bias. So I think probably the right label is negativity bias, because bad is stronger than good is not really a thing. But even that negativity bias, what do they mean? Well, for example, negative events lead us to seek causes more readily than positive events. Wars, for example, elicit endless books. You can find just library shelves stacked with books about war. The peace literature is paltry by comparison. Negative stimuli command more attention than positive stimuli. In rats, for example, negative tastes elicit stronger responses than do positive tastes. And in taste aversion experiments, a single exposure to a noxious food or drink can cause lasting avoidance of the item. It's called taste aversion. You have like one massive bad hangover to whatever it is, vodka, red wine or something, and you can't drink it for months or years afterwards. But there's nothing corresponding to the opposite of that. There's not like a one trial of something that was super good that erases things and changes your life for months or years. Picking out an angry face in a crowd is easier and faster to do than picking out a happy face. Pain feels worse than no pain feels good. Think about that. That's weird. Pain feels worse than no pain feels good. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer put it this way: we feel pain, but we don't feel painlessness. Just think about muscle pain. The difference between having a nice massage of your leg versus someone slamming a hammer on your leg. For the most part, when it comes to the body, no news is good news. We only become aware of our body parts when something goes wrong. So as Rosen and Roisman put it, there are erogenous zones, but there are no corresponding torturogenous zones. Well, essentially, any part can feel bad with the right kinds of instruments or pressure or whatever, but so difference there. We have more words to describe the qualities of physical pain. Deep, intense, dull, sharp, aching, burning, cutting, pinching, piercing, tearing, twitching, shooting, stabbing, thrusting, throbbing, penetrating, lingering, radiating. I guess some of those could be on the positive side, I suppose. Sexual encounter. Then we have this thrusting, okay, anyway. I may have to modify that. So somebody did a study and they counted up the number of words in our vocabulary we use to describe pain versus pleasure, and there was like 3 times more words to describe pain. Okay. There are more cognitive categories for and descriptive terms of negative emotions than positive emotions. Leo Tolstoy famously observed in 1875, since elevated to the Anna Karenina principle, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. There are more ways to fail than there are to succeed. As Aristotle wrote in the Nicomachean Ethics, it's possible to fail in many ways, while to succeed is possible in only one way. More succinctly, for men are good in but one way, but bad in many. In other words, it's difficult to reach perfection, and the paths to it are few, but there are many ways to fail and achieve perfection, and the paths away from it are many. Empathy is more readily triggered by negative stimuli than positive. People identify and sympathize with others who are suffering or in pain more than they do with others who are in a state happier or better off than them, which usually just elicits envy. And then when they fall, yes, Schadenfreude. Right? As Jean-Jacques Rousseau remarked in his 1762 novel, Emile, it is not in the human heart to put ourselves in the place of those who are happier than ourselves, but only in the place of those who are most to be pitied. These are really interesting now. Evil contaminates good more than good purifies evil. As the old Russian proverb says, a spoonful of tar can spoil a barrel of honey, but a spoonful of honey does nothing for a barrel of tar. They point out in India, for example, members of the higher caste may be considered contaminated by eating food prepared by members of the lower castes, but those in the lower castes do not receive an equivalent rise upward in purity status by eating food prepared by their upper caste counterparts. The notorious one drop of blood rule of racial classification in the 18th and 19th century had its origin in the Code Noor, or the Negro Code of 1685. Meant to guarantee the purity of the white race by screening out the tainted blood. Whereas, note Rosen and Roisman, there exists no historical evidence for the positive equivalent of a one-drop ordinance, that is, a statute whereby one's membership in a racially privileged class would be assured by one's being in possession of one drop of the racially superior blood. I think this goes a long ways to explaining genocide. It's one of the things that Rosen studies is discussed, and how easy it is to associate contaminant words that describe contaminants that would be disease carriers, for example, to a people. And this is why it's almost cliche the way people are considered as rodents or vermin, cockroaches, and some kind of disease, vector, vermin, something carrying disease that we should be wary of. And it's almost like every genocidal act in history tapped into the same disgust emotion that evokes that pushing away of these other people. And finally, in religious traditions, becoming a saint requires a life devoted to holy acts which can be erased overnight by a single immoral act, or in the secular world, decades devoted work for public causes, politics, or nonprofits, or whatever, can be erased in an instant with an extramarital affair, a financial scandal, or a criminal act. Again, just the one bad thing erases all the good, and it doesn't matter how many good things you do after that, people will only remember that one bad thing you did. And you just think of, any example in politics. So, but why would we have ever evolved this process of bad being stronger than good in the first place? And the answer is evolution. That is, there's an asymmetry between good and bad because there's an asymmetry in our environment of what could harm us or help us. In a complex machine or body, for example, all the parts must consistently work to keep the thing going. But if one part or system fails, it can be catastrophic to all the other parts and systems if the machine or organism stops or dies. So the stability of the overall system must be maintained, which requires the brain running the system to devote the most attention to the threats that could terminate the organism. You only live as long as everything works, so the good news of, say, experiencing yet another day of your heart just beating away nicely goes completely unnoticed. You're not even aware. But the moment there's some kind of cardiac event, boom, life-changing, assuming you survive. So in our evolutionary past, there was an asymmetry of payoffs in which the fitness cost of overreacting to a threat was less than the fitness cost of underreacting, so we err on the side of overreaction, that is pessimism. So I make an analogy from, remember the concept I wrote about in The Believing Brain, patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise, or meaningless noise. And the argument I made is that, the thought experiment is you're a hominid on the plains of Africa 3.5 million years ago. You're a little small brain bipedal primate, your name is Lucy. And you hear a rustle in the grass. Is it a dangerous predator or is it just the wind? So if you assume that the rustle in the grass is a dangerous predator, and it just turns out it's the wind, that's a type 1 error, a false positive. You thought A was connected to B, but there was no connection. But that's a relatively low-cost error to make, versus assuming that the rustle in the grass is just the wind, and it turns out it's a dangerous predator. Congratulations, you've just been given a Darwin Award for taking yourself out of the gene pool early. And that's a type 2 error, a false negative. But why can't you just wait around in the grass and collect more data to determine whether the noise is a predator or just the wind? And the answer is because predators don't wait around for you to collect more data. That's why they're stealthy. That's why they stalk their prey. And so the default position is just to assume that most rustles in the grass are dangerous predators. So that's the basis of magical thinking, superstition. Just one connection to another, we immediately think there must be some causal connection there. If you add some agency to it, you think that the pattern also has gods or spirits behind it, somebody controlling, running the show, that kind of thing. Okay, so it's the same kind of argument I'm making here, is that assuming that things are great and going to get better versus assuming that things are bad and going to get worse, there's an asymmetry of payoffs. Better to just think the worst. Because in the environment in which we evolved, things were very dangerous. It was a harsh place to live. And that gets us to really the even deeper ultimate explanation, which is the second law of thermodynamics, or entropy, or as the bumper sticker says, shit happens. In other words, the fact is our bodies are just running down. There are 100 ways you could die, and that things can go bad. And there are many ways that things can get better, but they're incremental, they're small, they're very hardly noticeable. So they're not important for us to think about compared to the bad things that could happen. So in other words, like misfortunes, like accidents and plagues, famine and disease, this is what happens when we do nothing. Poverty doesn't need an explanation. That's what happens when we do nothing. It's wealth that needs an explanation. It's health that needs an explanation, and so forth. And so this default position of assuming the worst creates this asymmetry, and we evolved in that world, not in the world in which only recently have things really taken a turn for much the better. And because it's not perfect, there'll always be enough bad things that get our attention and we notice them. And that, I think, goes a long ways to explaining why we have this bias toward pessimism. Thank you. All right, that was a little shorter than I thought, but that's okay. So, but we have lots of time for discussion, which is the more interesting part for me, because I've already heard what I have to say.
And I'm happy to bring a mic to you if you have questions.
Dr. Shermer, it's a pleasure to have you here. I read your book, The Moral Arc. It's a very, very intriguing topic that you bring to our minds for discussion. I do have a question for you in the regards with the mark of the universe bending towards morality. And I couldn't help but compare what you have to write with some of what Dr. Steven Pinker has to say in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature. I'm led to believe by your talk that moral progress doesn't necessarily progress in a linear fashion. It's always 2 steps forward, 1 step back. We stumble along the way, we get back on track, we continue. With the rise in regressive left and regressive right politics taking place around the world today, along with the rise in populism, could the argument be made that we are currently in a stage of moral regress? And if we are, what can be done to continue to bend towards a more moral universe?
Yeah, that's a super good question.
An excellent word.
Yeah, nails it.
Everybody's question.
Right. Well, okay. So first of all, yes, it is. My argument is that there's nothing inevitable about this. The whole thing could go south. Thermodynamics, the second law of entropy, the whole thing could, take a dive backwards. But I don't think so. I think because we've come so far, it would be hard to rewind the clock very far back. I mean, for example, what are the chances that any state would reinstitute slavery as a legal institution? Write it right into the Constitution, put it right in there that it's totally legal. Georgia might? Well, okay. I'm skeptical of that. But, torture be brought back, maybe. It would take a lot to rewrite over all the work that's been done. So I'm not worried about the big things like that. I think the 2 steps back part is what you described, 3 forward, 2 back. And that is also the point Obama made in that particular speech and also his final speech to the UN, in which he says, we have to remember it's 3 forward, 2 back. So, things like Ferguson and these incidents that happen, this is part of the, the up and back, the sawtooth. It's like global warming, but the tooth was down, it's cooler. No. It's the overall blade we have to keep looking at. So what to do about it? Well, okay, we just have to keep pushing forward. So this documentary I recommend, which I was just watched last night, so it's fresh on my mind. There's a moment in part 1 at the 40-minute mark. So watch this. It's one of these concessions to conspiracy theories that I'm willing to make. Because it's not like conspiracy theories are like perpetual motion machines. They can't be true. There are some conspiracies. Watergate was a conspiracy. The assassination of Lincoln was a conspiracy. And all the WikiLeaks stuff about the NSA shows us that government does stuff that we don't know about. That's in a way a kind of a conspiracy. So after Obama's victory in 2008, there's this scene where a number of the bigwig in the Republican Party, Gingrich and Boehner and Cantor and these guys, they go to this bar in D.C. Back room, the dark, wood and the whiskey and the hitch type drink, and they're just drowning in their sorrows. What are we gonna do? And then finally they come around. You know what? We gotta get back in the saddle and kick some ass here. We gotta do something. And they spent the next 2 years just organizing themselves, and this was all feedback through the talk radio. You could hear it because they were playing the clips from Levin and Rush Limbaugh of them repeating the stuff that these guys were feeding them. And so that's what you do. You fight back after you have a couple drinks to recover from the certain. I mean, they were saying we got our asses kicked. Obama just kicked our ass, and he did. He had the run of the show for a few years, and then the midterms. So midterms, work for the midterms to turn things around. That's in 2 years, and then of course another 4. So that's just presidentially. But globally, intellectually, whatever, I think we have to keep pushing for not nationalism, not populism, because that's regressive. I would agree. I think absolutely. Hopefully, Trump won't turn things back like with Cuba. We should keep the channels open with Cuba. That's good. That's open borders is good for exchanges of different kinds. And so I'm worried about. Trump is not a conservative. He's a populist. And he's a mercantilist. People don't even use this word, but he's sort of a pre-Adam Smith mercantilist. That we need to hoard our resources and our jobs. And here, that is not how wealth is created. So, we need some economists to step up. Well, they have been, but more say this is incorrect thinking about how to create more wealth. And the purpose of corporations like Ford Motor Company is not to create jobs. That's not what they're for. That's not what they're to make cars, not jobs. People forget this. That's a national mercantilist populist argument. The purpose of companies is to make jobs. No, it isn't. The jobs is a secondary effect of producing products and services that people want. Anyway.
What was the name of the show you mentioned?
Oh, that's the PBS Frontline, The Divided States of America. It's worth. I mean, most of it'll be. You'll remember all of it because we all lived through the last 8 years. But they string it together and show exactly how these guys did this. There is no correspondence to progressive talk radio or liberal talk radio. I can't think of anybody. On TV, Bill Maher and what's her name on
MSNBC.
Yeah, Rachel Maddow. They're great, but we need more. And on radio, there's nobody on radio. And Air America went.
Died.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I've generally been an optimist in face of a lot of pessimism in the world, but the last maybe 6 months or so, even beyond the political thing, I've started to question, as I've been reading more on evolutionary basis of morality and things, that we haven't had a chance to, evolution has not had a chance to change us in any fundamental way. And so as I see this positive arc of the moral foundation of society and whatnot, I have functioned from this, or gone from this perspective of it's just going to keep getting better and better. But I don't understand how I can make that argument from an evolutionary perspective, in that we are the same. And so I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
So Robert Wright's book, Non-Zero, he was really one of the first to make this argument that, I'm not sure I'm completely on board with it, but it's that in the long history of life, he goes all the way back 3.5 billion years to the first prokaryotic cells, and when they began to conglomerate into these eukaryotic cells as a form of cooperation. So for example, in your cells, we're all made of eukaryotic cells, and in there's mitochondria that produce the energy for your cells. And in the mitochondria is DNA. It's called mitochondrial DNA. It's how we track, it's how paleoanthropologists and anthropologists track genetic shifts through populations on the maternal side through mitochondrial DNA. What is a little organelle inside of a cell have its own DNA that's not part of the nucleus that has the DNA that we commonly think of? Okay, so the answer is that because it used to be its own independent organism living on its own. And so all these things kind of got together. So he then builds from there, saying there's been a slight asymmetry between non-zero and zero-sum games, with the non-zero winning out. And so cooperation is in our genes. It's just where we're going in all life. Now, where I'm not quite with him is that Bob says that that if it wasn't us at this level of advanced civilization, it would have been the Neanderthals. Had we gone extinct, Neanderthals survived, they'd be flying jets and playing with the internet and so on. And if it wasn't the Neanderthals, it would have been Homo erectus. It wasn't Homo erectus. If they all went extinct, chimps and gorillas would be driving cars and flying planes and typing Twitter accounts or whatever. And if it wasn't for anyway, so he thinks there's a certain inevitability built into it. That's a little too deterministic for me. I think it's a little bit of a kind of a theory of history, a stage theory of history, that these stages unfold in an inevitable way. I don't think so. I think more so we've kind of made it happen by looking around and going, well, how can we make life better? We've tried this, we've tried that, let's try this. It's sort of an experimental method, which is why I really start with the Enlightenment and the idea of applying methods of science from the physical sciences and the biological sciences and medical sciences to the social sciences, the economy, politics. That's why Jefferson called the democracy an experiment. It's an experiment. You tweak the variables, you run it for a couple of years, you tweak them again, you run it again, you just keep doing it, keep doing it. You have 50 different states, you got 50 different tax codes. You can study that. That's a database. This is what people do. 50 different states, you got 50 different gun control laws. All right, let's study it. This is what sociologists criminologists do. They study those data sets. So I think that's more of a sort of a human volition that we decided we want to do this. And because we have inside of us an evolved tendency to have some empathy and cooperativeness, but also reason to control entropy. That is, we could push back against evolution and entropy. So I think it's less inevitable, more of a choice. Therefore, I'm not so positive this will always continue, that we have to keep at it constantly keep at it.
You've mentioned in there evolution. Have you dug into pieces of stuff that indicate some pretty strong recent evolution, like Gregory Clark's Farewell to Alms?
Yeah, I know Greg Clark, and he's got a nice piece in Saturday's Wall Street Journal, a review of a book on income inequality that I recommend. He's a good economist, but I think what he's talking about is more cultural and family and those kinds of conditions that are less evolved Unless I thought you were going to go down the thing about race or immunity to certain diseases or lactose intolerance. There's been a lot of documentation that a lot of things have changed in the last 10,000 years. It's not like evolution stopped at the Neolithic Revolution. There's still stuff going on. But I'm not sure I follow you on the Gregory Clark stuff with economics.
I'm thinking particularly of his discussions in detail about, it's summarized in a paper called Genetically Capitalist.
Oh, this is where families leave money to their heirs.
That's not exactly the point. The point is that the rich people had twice as many surviving
Oh,
children
yes,
as the
yes,
poorest
right.
people. And so for a very large extent, we are descended from the rich people of the Middle Ages.
Yeah. I don't know. I haven't looked at his thesis that carefully, so I'm not sure. What do you think?
Well, it's pretty straightforward. His data is absolutely solid. And indeed, the question was what kinds of things were selected under that process.
Well, I guess you'd have to, you'd have to show that the vast majority of humans living today are descended from those handful of aristocrats. I'm not sure that's the case.
And that there's some inheritable traits from
Yeah, I'm not sure.
aristocracy
I'm not
that
sure you'd always
actually
want those
affects
traits.
modern behavior.
Yeah, I'm not sure you'd want those traits.
Right.
It's a little bit of the argument against eugenics that we make that actually a more diverse population is better genetically than a more restricted one. I mean, the moment you start selecting for characteristics that you think are good, I want height, certain looks, whatever. Because of pleiotropy, you're going to get a whole host of other traits you weren't even thinking about, which is what happens with breeders and animals. You breed for this one particular thing, and you get all these other things you weren't thinking of. Not always good.
In your discussion of income increase, don't you have to look at the net result? For instance, I'm old enough to remember when bread cost a dime, and now it costs $2.50. It's like a 25 times increase, but income has increased that much too.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
What is really the net increase?
Well, that's why I put those in 2015 dollars, so you adjust for inflation. Economists always do that. Almost everything in goods and services is cheaper now than it was generations ago, except for college education. So it's still not clear whether it's still worth paying that much more. So bread is that much more, or whatever, a gallon of gas is that much more, and so on. We can afford it, but college education has gone up, orders of magnitude more than all these other things. And why? Well, there's a lot more administrators and deans than there used to be, and they have to be paid. That's in part, that's one argument.
Thank you. As far as the wealth and poverty claim, what are your thoughts on artificial intelligence eliminating not only skilled jobs such as autonomous driving, but high-skilled jobs as well, such as engineering or something on that field? Robotics.
Yeah, I'm not one of the AI doomsayers. There are those out there. Bill Gates and Elon Musk and Stephen Hawking have all made public statements. Sam Harris as well, a good TED Talk on this, outlining the arguments made by the people that work in AI that say that there's three different things. There's the economic argument that they're going to take over our jobs. Okay, then there's the evil AI. They're going to develop these emotions that young males who write these scenarios out think of, like a take over the world. And as Steve Pinker talks about, well, maybe they'll evolve more along female lines, and they won't be thinking about taking over the world and killing everybody. And then the third one is that the more serious one by Bostrom in his book Superintelligence is that they won't even know they're killing us. They'll just take over everything. So his scenario is the paperclip maker. So you design this paperclip maker, and it starts making paperclips, and for some reason there's no off button, or it figures out that you're going to turn it off before it turns you into paperclips, and then it turns you into paperclips, and everyone in this room, the entire room, this entire building is turned into paperclips. The 805 freeway is paperclips. The entire Earth is paperclips. The moon, everything, the whole solar system. Pretty soon, the whole universe is paperclips. Okay, stop. This is what I say. Okay, they have all these. These guys have all these if-then arguments. Okay, so they start here where we are. And they go, okay, if this happens, then this might happen. If that happens, then this might happen. And then 20 steps later, they go, and the world's over. this is how all apocalyptic thinkers operate, and they're always wrong, because somewhere back here somebody goes, wait a minute, wait. And already the guys at Google have figured out, and they call it the big red button. It's just sort of a joke, inside joke, but this is how you can turn it off. And so I've read all this literature, so your Tesla's driving down the road, and there's you're alone in the car, and there's 5 people in the sidewalk, and the brakes are out. Does it slam into the 5 and kill them, or does it turn right into the wall and kill you? Okay, how about we make it so the brakes don't go out? They're double reductive system, which is what, of course. So, there's 100 things you can do. I'm not worried about the economics, because people are very creative and clever at thinking of other things to do, and that's never been an issue. It's always been an argument, the horse and buggy. Oh no, what are the horse and buggy people going to do? They're going to drive cars or whatever. The American Horse and Buggy Corporation went out of business when the automobile became very popular. Oh, the poor horse and buggy people, they've lost their jobs. Well, they can do something else. Okay. It's never been a problem. I'm really not worried about it.
I'll go here.
Thanks for coming out. So this is a more general question about skepticism. I remember reading a study recently that kind of postulated that when people are presented with evidence that contradicts, like solid evidence that contradicts their previously determined worldview, you know where I'm going with this, they double down on it, yeah. So as someone engages frequently, that's not on a debate forum, but like on a personal, when you're just trying to reach an individual, what do you do to kind of counter that? Is there a way around? What are your techniques?
Yeah, I read that article. It was in Scientific American by that Shermer guy that writes that column. That was my column last month. It's called the backfire effect, although Carol Tavrish, your next speaker, she and I were kind of laughing about this. It's really cognitive dissonance. But the young psychologists, they're like, well, we can't call it cognitive dissonance because, that was already, we have to invent our own word. It's the backfire effect. Like, okay, whatever. Anyway, what it is that, so the argument is that, you're encountering a climate denier, you present the tree ring data and the ice core data and this and that and so on. And not only do they not change their mind, they double down on their beliefs. Okay, so why? Because it isn't just evidence in those particular cases. So it depends on who you're talking to and what the issue is. Because most people you talk to are totally pro-science across the board, except for this one area that's important to them. So if it's somebody that cares deeply about, that they think the biblical creation story is the right one, they're likely to be in favor of vaccines and use their cell phone and fly in jets and so on. They're not anti-science. It's just this one thing, that evolution, they don't really know. The jury's still out, What jury? Where? The climate deniers, what is it that bothers them? It has nothing to do with CO2 emissions. It's everything to do with economics. They think that if it's true, then the government's going to impose these draconian measures that cut back on the economy and interfere with free markets and free trade, and that's the American way of life, and pretty soon the world's over. And so you've touched on a moral foundation, something that they define themselves by. These are my 6 core beliefs of how I define myself. And you're telling me that these are wrong? So I try to come at it a different way. There's several different things you can do. I have a little list. Like, first of all, be respectful, be nice, listen, and actually try to repeat, the rules of debate. See if you can repeat your opponent's argument as if they would then say, yeah, that is what I'm arguing. And actually do that. Let me get this straight. You're saying that you think, and then just repeat it. And half the time they'll go, well, no, that's not what I'm arguing at all. When in fact it is, they don't even know what they believe, right? Okay, so maybe you can get some correction there and move in a direction that's more harmonious, and then keep emotion out of it. No ad Hitlerum, the moment Hitler comes in, it's over. Conversation's over. This is especially personal for me because my wife is German. She's from Germany. She was born and raised in Cologne. She just came here 2.5 years ago to be with me, if you can believe it. I couldn't either. Anyway, but so we're sitting there channel surfing, just late at night, whatever. Hitler. She goes, "What is it with you Americans? I mean, we don't even talk about the guy anymore. I mean, we are so over Hitler and the Nazis, and this is all you get in America, right?" And it comes up, so you got to leave Hitler out of it, right? And then if you can somehow make a connection like, I used to believe that, or, when I first read that, I thought, well, there might be something to that, and then what happened? Well, then I read these other things, and I started thinking about this other, all right. Or, I actually believe that. In my case, I can say, I used to be a Christian and a creationist. And I was skeptical that, I remember those climate people were saying all this is going to happen. Never happened, so I was pretty skeptical. What happened? Well, then around 2005 or so, I started reading the literature, and wow, okay, it must be true. I changed my mind, because it's good to change your mind. So you sort of present it like a positive thing. I was with you. I was right where you are. So it makes people feel like they're respected, they're listened to, and you were like them, and they're like you. So you have sort of a connection there. And then, you just that's all you can do. Just plant a little seed. Not likely that people are going to change their mind on the spot, but maybe later they go home and they read or they think about it, and then they change their mind. Usually they won't say anything. They'll just quit talking about it. This is what happens with people that deconvert from Christianity or religion to atheism, or usually they just convert to nothing. They just quit talking about it. That was what happened with me when I was born again. I was totally into it. Witnessing, we called it witnessing, and so when I changed my mind, I just quit talking about it. I think my brothers and sisters were relieved. He finally quit talking about it. Every meal, oh, here he comes. Jesus is coming. So I think, you don't make a big announcement. Hey, guess what? I gave up that stuff. And, and don't tell people their most cherished beliefs are bullshit, because then so Carol will tell you this next time, the pyramid. You're here, and you go, well, your beliefs are bullshit. Whoop, you're out here now. I mean, the wall goes up, cognitive dissonance kicks in, and they're not even listening to you anymore. They're just waiting for you to shut up so they can make their next point.
So I think we can all agree that we do live in the best time possible to live, but wouldn't you also agree that it's also important to look at the things that could cause mass destruction in the world, and make sure that we don't have a false negative on the things that could harm us, like the TTAPS paper with nuclear winter and how many nuclear warheads it would take to sanitize the planet Earth, or climate change and stuff. So, I mean, I'm optimistic in the long run that we'll get out of the bottleneck, but pessimistic in the short run. What are your thoughts on some of those things?
The only thing I'm worried about is nuclear weapons. I think that's the only truly existential threat. If by existential threat you mean that it's the complete elimination of our species or the end of Western civilization, or something like that. So I think people use this word too loosely. Terrorism is an existential threat. No, it's not. No terrorist organization has ever overthrown a state. They've not. They've not taken over a state, set up a new state, and so on. It's never happened. And in fact, if you look at the studies on this, I recount in the Moral Arc, is that they almost never get any of their political goals. The most they could get, is we'll let the people we kidnapped go if you let our people go. Sometimes you'll get something like that, or if you give us some money. Some states, some governments pay ransom to terrorists. This was a big 60 Minutes piece just last week. Obama said, I'm not paying, it's the policy of the United States, we don't pay terrorists ransom money. And other states do. Germany does, for example. And it's a sort of a hard decision to make. But it doesn't matter in the long run, because they're never going to actually accomplish anything other than maybe just that short-term goal. So I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about climate change being existential. I think we can, I call it the Elon Musk solution. Just find, okay, so here's my other counter to conservatives. Yes, global warming is real, but you know what? You can make a ton of money on green technology. I mean, there is money to be made. It's sort of the conservative. We want to conserve our economy.
Well, we know that Exxon's been making plans of how to make money off global warming, even while they were denying it and convincing the public to the contrary. We know that for a fact.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's right. So, but nuclear weapons, yes, I'm slightly worried about getting past the problem of it's called the other guy problem. That we would give him up if the other guy would, and he's thinking, well, I'd give him up if that other guy would. And it's the trust is an issue. It's still an issue. We've got it down from 87,000 nuclear weapons to under 10,000. So that's a lot. That's huge. But unfortunately, there's about 7,500 weapons ready to go. Well, that are stored that could be used, and about 2,000 or 3,000 that are on missiles in planes and submarines ready to go. That probably not enough to trigger a nuclear winter, but it could. So we got to get it down to below 1,000. at the moment, for maybe the next century or so, until political nations change dramatically, you have them for deterrence only. And you know, there was this push by the Obama administration to go to a no first use policy. Okay, and when I first read it, I thought, yeah, that'd be good. No, that's actually not good, because the whole point of having them is to deter somebody from using them. And if you say we'll never use them unless, you know, we're attacked, but you know, it's the escalating effects from conventional war. If you say we're never going to use them, then you end up like with Obama drawing the red line in Syria, and then they step over it and they go, okay, well, and then you don't do anything about it. So, you know, I don't know how to get past that in the current geopolitical situation. There's always going to be the need for deterrence and having a big stick because the other guy's got one. And of course, Putin worries me, and I don't know. You know, maybe he and Trump will figure something. This would be a miracle if it continued down. I'm totally on board with nuclear zero. That was Obama's plan. Nobel Peace Prize for that. The nuclear zero organization I support. You know, I think that's the only way to go. It's going to be a while, maybe a century. I don't know. That's the big one that sort of hangs over.
A century, huh? Make it a question.
Back into hopefully your wheelhouse of skepticism. I'm surprised by the impact of education and information. I thought that would propel the argument forward, but I find my own experiences are that when I engage with somebody, they will throw 50 hours of YouTube videos at me on Zeitgeist and everything else to prove their point, but actually not be able to explain a single one themselves.
Right.
So as information flow is happening, I'm not seeing it help us propel that skepticism forward.
Well, that's why we have to have our own skeptic videos, which we do. I mean, we make them, lots of people do, and literature and booklets and, you know, arguments, you know, that's just the world we live in. And so we're not going back. We're not going to get rid of the internet. So all the crazies will be out there pumping out bad information, false news, you know, and so on. That's going to be there. So we just have to counter it with Snopes, skeptics, you know, just keep pounding away at it. That's all we can do.
Absolutely. Hey, you mentioned that a terrorist organization hasn't taken over a government. Are you talking about modern? Because I mean, the Bolshevik Revolution, French Revolution. I mean, we can talk about a lot.
Yeah,
of
no, I was just thinking of
as a whole.
I was thinking of it's just modern since the say 70s.
Yeah, but that's like a really.
Well, okay, well, all right. Let's look at those. Bolsheviks. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd call them terrorists. I guess violent political. Okay, so the database I'm referring to.
Pretty terroristic.
Yeah,
you know, that's a lot of. That's like, it's really efficient terrorism where you just kill a huge amount of people.
Yes, yeah.
Is there a distinction to be made, a useful distinction to be made between revolutionaries and terrorists?
Yeah.
Maybe not.
Obviously, they see themselves as freedom fighters, but yeah, it's a fair point. French Revolution, yeah.
And regardless of what anybody's stance is on Israel, there's no question that terrorism played a role in the establishment of the state.
Yes, okay,
People
all
who
right.
led the government early.
All right.
Later came out.
I guess I was just thinking of, more recent ones, like, you know, would ISIS overthrow, you know, a state, you know? Even if they got a dirty bomb or a nuclear weapon and detonated it in New York and killed 5 million people, this is not going to end the United States. I mean, yeah. Yeah, okay, all right, that's a fair point. Yeah. Yeah.
Fair point.
That is a murky point. Like, what is a terrorist? Okay, that's a fair point. Yeah.
Mike?
Oh, Michael, hi.
Hi, how are you? Hey, are we living in a simulation? And if we are,
I'm sorry I gave him the mic.
Do we have to go to work tomorrow? I don't know.
Yes, we are, and no, you don't have to go to work tomorrow.
And Michael's one of our board members. Make of that what you will. So,
I have a funny tale to tell about that. Do you know where that actually comes from?
Please tell us.
There's a story that actually occurred. It happened at the Artificial Life Conference in '86, where Hans Moravec was rapping. You know who Hans is. Hans was rapping away and holding his copy of Mind Children in his hand, and about how the everlasting, ever-falling cost of computation. I said, Hans, do you realize how unlikely it is that this is the first time we've ever had this conversation? Hans looks at me with this really blank look on his face. And I says, well, take it on out. You realize that when you get enough computation, cheap enough kind of thing, people will simulate the past.
Right.
And they won't do it just once. They'll do it like these interminable reenactments of Civil War battles and stuff like that.
With every permutation of what could have happened.
Right, you betcha. So the chances of this being the first time we've ever had this conversation, or this being the first time I've ever been on a lecture with you in this particular kind of place, are practically zero.
I like the previous one we did.
Moravec wrote this, by the way, into one called Pigs in Cyberspace. And he actually has credit over, has publication over before
All right.
Bostrick did it.
Someone else?
Science fiction is fun, yes.
Yes, who am I missing? Okay. Oh, sorry.
Hi there. I remember reading one of the books, don't remember which one, that you had an experience with objectivism and their movement. So I was wondering,
yeah, in Why People Believe Weird Things, I wrote a chapter about cults in which I used as an unlikely example of Ayn Rand objectivism. Yeah.
So I was wondering what kind of mechanics and similarities do you find between then and now, between libertarianism and the neo-confederate wing, and how it has influenced a bit of the alt-right and how it goes back and forth between those movements?
Well, the characteristics of a cult is what I was after there, that you can apply to any group, which would be, cult of personality of the leader's infallible, the doctrines that the leader gives down are infallible and not to be disputed. The members of the group are not allowed to challenge the status quo or the doctrines, and so on. It mostly has to do with control over members and finances by either the leader or a small elite. Usually these groups fall apart after the leader dies. Case of Ayn Rand, when she died, there was like 3 people at her funeral or something. I mean, had alienated everybody because, the collective, the group that had grown, everyone got kicked out for smoking the wrong cigarettes or watching the wrong movie or listening to the wrong music and so on. Scientology, I'm watching with much interest the Leah Remini's series on A&E because she could do more than anybody else ever by reaching a wide audience. And instead of focusing on the goofy stuff like we do on the Xenu, the Galactic Warrior, and the doctrines, and what does the E-meter really do, she doesn't care about any of that. It's the harm to the families and members, and how the organization destroys people's lives, and it's the victim. So I think that could touch more people, and maybe some government regulators about what's really going on there. The hard part is when you're in the cult, you don't think you're being abused. So if an investigator comes by and says, "Are you being held against your will?" No, I like cleaning toilets with a toothbrush at $1 a month, and I signed a billion-year contract because I believe it. Okay, well, the authorities are going to go, okay. That's all they can do. So, but it's possible that groups like that. The Mormon Church almost died after Joseph Smith was killed, but Brigham Young, was sort of the Miscavige of that group and got him going again. And so, but usually they die.
Did I see another hand? Did I see any other hands? Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir, very much for being here. A question. I was brought up in South Africa. Believe it or not, as a young child, I remember when apartheid first came in 1948. I remember very clearly some of the discussions amongst adults, such as it's a very small group. It will never go anywhere. Give him chance. He doesn't really believe the things that he says, they won't happen. The rest is history. Please give me some assurance that it's not deja vu all over again.
Yeah, you're talking about Trump. Yes, sir. Well, just double checking, you never know. Well, I don't know. I don't know anything more than anybody else. Heck, election night. I'm channel surfing around. I come across, Fox News. There's Charles Krauthammer. He is their guy. He is their prognosticator. This guy knows more inside stuff on politics than I'll ever forget. Nothing. I mean, he is 9 o'clock at night, California time, midnight, East Coast time. Charles, call it. Hillary. I mean, so nobody knows. Okay, Trump may not even know what he's going to do. That's entirely possible.
I think we can bet money on that. I'm going to go out on a limb.
Yeah.
That gets my vote. I'll put money behind that.
However, I'm not as worried as a lot of people are. I think there's enough checks and balances in place to prevent any one person from doing too much. Now, it's true he's got the House and the Senate, but so did Obama for the first 2 years. So it could, I don't know. It's, yes, things could go south. It's not impossible, yes, but I doubt that he could overturn a lot of the constitutional guarantees and protectors of civil rights and civil liberties. I would be surprised if he could do much. I could be wrong, but anyway, I'm not terrified. I'm not terribly worried about it. I think this too shall pass. I have a lot of conservative friends, and they were saying the same kind of stuff when Obama was elected. This is it. It is over. Socialism is here. Communism. This is all I heard. Not just, my friend, talk radio. This is all you heard.
False equivalence.
Well, maybe.
Not a
maybe.
good comparison. I don't buy the comparison. Anybody else? That was great. Before we let you go, Michael, and thank you so much. Mike, would you step this way, and Ann's going to hand you what you're going to hand Michael.
Okay.
We are presenting Michael a bottle.
All right.
So, for coming down.
I
Thank
heard
you very
you
much.
do these things. Thank you. Wow. It says doomsday pessimism. Like the skull and crossbones with the mushroom cloud. Very nice.
Thanks for coming down.
I may drink this tonight. No.
Wait till you get home.
Yeah, this is a decent bottle. It's not as good as the
beautiful.
bottles I got from Tam. What's with that? That's Coppola. That's all right. So yeah, Michael Shermer presents Doomsday Pessimism. The date, SDSS, our logo there. And
I just talked to Carol on the way down here, and she said, "Tell me how it went." So I'm going to tell you, you get a bottle of mine. So now you got to do it for Carol.
There you, oh yes, no. This is actually, we're making this a standard gift for presenters.
Yeah, nice.
So Michael, before you got here, I was talking to the group and made some announcements, and one of them is that this is the biggest turnout we've had in quite some time, and we are thrilled to be able to kick it off this year with you and with this turnout. Thank you ever so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. Glad to be first. And do come out for Carol. She's great.
Yes, she is.
She's even better.
And so Michael's going to be over here. He has a handful of books for sale.
Oh, you know what happened was, I meant to grab a case of the paperbacks. So I had a lot more, but it ended up being the hardbacks. I guess that's all there is, right?
Yeah.
So, and I don't know. So just make it instead of 32, just make it $20 for the hardback because I don't have change. So $20, that's it.
Okay, terrific. So, Mike, I'll let you just take a seat so you can sign, because people might have things to sign.
Yeah.
And there's some free issues of Skeptic magazine. Please take them politely. There's not enough for everyone. And if we could, if anyone wants to stay would be willing to stay a little longer and help us break down here and pack up, that would be most appreciated. And we have Drinking Skeptically. February 8th is Drinking Skeptically. Come out and see us then. And Carol Tavris, our February speaker. Thanks so much for coming out, folks.
Just bring that bottle to the Drinking Skeptic.